In the darkest worlds that ever were, the only thing that brings light are stories. Those stories are kept in one place, the tiny bookcase.
Welcome, Story Seekers!
To the Tiny Bookcase. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and we've got a cracking set of small tales for you.
For this episode, we are joined by an author who specialises in epic fantasy, techno thrillers, and hard sci-fi.
He is a Nebula-nominated and best-selling author, and we are very excited to pick his brain about stories.
We would like to welcome Dr. Charles E. Gannon.
Hello, Chuck.
Hello. Very good to be here. Thanks very much. I've enjoyed listening to your podcast.
Well, that's very kind of you straight off at the top. How has everything been over on your side of the pond recently?
There are so many ways you could mean that. I'm going to assume you mean COVID. COVID is obviously retracting its evil, if invisibly microscopic tentacles, and we're getting out. I do wish that that we have this sort of puzzling resistance to vaccination in certain parts of our country. That's all I'll say about it. But hopefully that will see those percentages pick up. Life is coming back to normal. The weather's certainly nice for it here in Maryland. So right there in the middle of our part of the Atlantic coast, and that's the short of it.
COVID's had a bit of an overwhelming crush on everything, hasn't it? If you're not talking about that, what are you talking about? So let's ask you a completely different question instead. In your opinion, have you eaten more or less ice cream in the last 12 months than the years preceding?
Well, I eat ice cream that isn't ice cream. I'm diabetic too, so I would say I've eaten about the same amount. So no, I can't say that.
Are you a type 2 diabetic or a type 1
Type
diabetic?
2, yep, type 2. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm a type 1.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a full set there.
I feel like
If they come up with 3, then there's going to be a lot of consternation in the medical and global communities.
Yeah, go eat your sugar, Ben, you loser.
the worst thing is that I actually really don't like sweet things.
You
Well,
like me, I'm a sweet thing.
That's clearly not the worst thing, but anyway.
Say. I don't know, man. Ketoacidosis is a piece of shit.
I think I might need to check my privilege at the door of this episode.
Good grief. I think we need to move on.
Yeah. Right. Time for some stories, I think. Nico, you'll be going first, and the prompt is problem solved.
Problem solved. I don't know what Cherie said in response. The words were fed into my armpit, intertwined with sobs. In that moment, she sounded like a bleeding animal. You know, like when somebody wings a deer on the freeway, but it doesn't actually die? Yeah, that. I performed my duties once again, and moved the hair from the side of her face that I could see. The eyeliner she's wearing has transformed from smooth, clear lines ringing the lower lids to blotchy streaks that spread all the way to her chin. And I knew that under her compressed cheek, my shirt was losing all hope of making even a 2-day run. I can't hear you, she. I place a finger gently under her chin and push softly. I need to pry her off of me. This was, in our long time as colleagues, the longest physical contact we had ever had. But it was not exactly how I had pictured it. I mean, we'd touched each other before or whatever, but... Okay. We had this big secret because, 2 years ago, at our work crappy Thanksgiving meal, they took us to this Chinese joint that sucked ass. By the time we'd closed up and went there, they had nothing left except booze. So we just went for it. Well, at the meal, we got hammered and then we kissed. I mean, it's not like a big thing or anything, but we were talking and I confessed that I'd always thought she was hot, and she said that I used to be a dork, but I'd gotten kind of handsome, you know. I'd been hitting the gym and stuff, so... Anyway, then we're like locking lips, and I can feel that second base shit coming, and she just pulls away and laughs. You know I've got a boyfriend, Travis. She shook her head like the kiss was gonna come off. Oh, I swear to God, if I was single, I'd be all over you. She'd kiss my forehead, like up on her tiptoes, and then disappeared into the other employees. So I, like, angry smoked the rest of my pack, and then went in to pretend like that shit didn't happen. So now, from what I gather, she is single, and true to her word, she's all over me. I didn't sign up for this, though. The wailing and the leaking. Ugh. I look at the screen showing the security for the store. It's like 3 in the afternoon, so nobody's coming for coffee right now. Maybe like the Starbucks guys, but our regulars, they're already huddled into beanbags, playing on how they're going to be famous musicians by the end of the week. My eyes drift to the stack of demos these dudes had given us over the years. Shit, we don't even play them in here. But if we throw them out, I know one of those dudes is going to check the trash and see that we did that. Right, Charisse. Gotta focus up. Listen, he might not have left you, or whatever. I shrug in a way that I hope is non-committal. This is a big moment, really. If she's given up on the idea of him, then hey, I've still been hitting the gym for the last 2 years, and girl, I can be here with you, here for you. It's not like that, Travis. It's been over a week and nobody has heard anything from him. Her face looks crazy right now. I know she's a few years older than me. It must be like 30 by now, but she's still hot, you know? Hasn't moved into that mom hot either. She's just still fine. But right now, her face is all screwed up and there's makeup all over it and shit, maybe he's ghosting you. You know what dudes are like. I try another of those shrugs. I mean, it would definitely be weird to try and make out with her now, right? But like, how long do we stay in this stage for? I don't want to be holding her hair off her face while she barfs out of sheer sadness. She's shaking her head so violently, I actually get a little worried. I mean, I'm way bigger than she is. I swear she could knock me out right now. You can't ghost somebody after 8 years, T. You just can't. She looks like her world is falling apart. But this is my time. A time to remember all that shit she's told me over the years. Sure that I've been listening. I don't know, He never asked you to marry him, right? Dude went a long time not giving you the respect of her proposal. Maybe he was just biding his time and waiting for a chance to get out. She seems to implode when I say that. I've definitely hit a sore spot. Yeah, it's disrespectful. If you ask me, hell, I'd marry you right now. You're a catch. It's his fault he can't see that. I nod for emphasis. I'm pretty sure she's looking up at me, but I maintain my stare at the CCTV. This young couple's reading the menu taped on the inside of the window. The fuck I'm losing my chance with this chick because somebody wants a macchiato. I mean, I'm surprised when it happens, but she laughs. She lets out this little giggle, and honestly, I don't know if it's a good thing, a bad thing, or nothing at all. I bet you would too, huh? Right. I gotta look down, look right in the eyes. I match her gaze. Her face looks like somebody sprayed a hose on her. She takes a big sniff in like a cokehead. I'm sorry. I must look horrible. I know my part. And play it well. You don't know how to look horrible, I lift her chin up again, and I go for the kiss. It's a sweet spot. I'm pretty sure I timed it right. She leans into my body, and there's real passion there. I let her feel how muscular I am, then I break the kiss off. You know, keep control, leave him wanting more. I'm sorry. I couldn't help it. I shake my head the way I've done into a mirror for so long. You deserve better than that shit. You always have. I've always You mean a lot to me. She's in. I see that trap close like steel jaws around a bear's leg. I always said we'd be good together, didn't I? She smiles weakly, and I resist the urge to grab a handful of tissues and clean her face. If I didn't... If I... Her voice starts to trail. I have to get this shit on lockdown. Hey. You know what? I've got the shift covered. Go home, take one of the cartons of chocolate from the freezer. I'll write it off as out of date. Watch a movie, take a nice hot bath, and I'll come pick you up at 8 once the late shift are in, alright? No one eats dinner alone when they're sad. I smile. My practice smile. She gives one back. You really are the best, aren't you? I always knew you were something special. Nah, I thought I was a dork. We laugh, which is good, because I was relying on her joining in. Go on, we got people coming in. I'll see you tonight. I steal another kiss, and I leave her twisting her fingers together. It's all working out exactly as I planned. I need her to not be here when I leave at 6. Not 8. Gotta take a trip down to the river, drop a few things off. Another day in the trunk, and that is gonna start to stink too bad for Febreze to fix. Deal with the business, and go pick up my date. She always said she'd be with me if she didn't have a boyfriend. Well, problem solved.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
well, nice
Oh,
and
yeah.
fun. I like that. Oh,
What a
body
dick,
in the...
eh?
Yeah, what a dick. It was when he used the phrase that he actually, in his internal monologue, referred to it as angry smoked the rest of the pack.
Yeah.
I was just like, I would hate this man if I met him.
I think it was for me just from the outset. And you did this really well. You set up in the very first lines the fact that there was really going to be you you kept listening for something redeeming in this guy, and every hint suggested, nope. The more we hear, the worse it's going to get. And so the twist at the end. I mean, I think somebody who probably doesn't write stories will get shocked by it because the guy seems, he does seem like a dork. Seems
Yeah.
desperate. He seems insecure, and you don't. It's normal not to impute, oh yeah, and a sort of casual homicidalist at the same time. But that's who he was, but as a writer, I'm saying, oh, he's really reeling us in here, isn't he? With all these sort of pathetic, character traits and the sadly, unfortunately accurate regional American accent and all the rest that makes this a person that you're prepared to dislike, and you're not necessarily seeing, but you're set up and perfectly willing to accept that he is every bit the shit he turns out to be, the murderous shit he turns out to be. Excuse me.
A murderous shit, yeah.
How could you accuse me of creating a man so vile on purpose?
You love to fondle our expectations, don't you, Lie?
Oh, I don't know how I feel about that.
Feel may be the operative verb here. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how I fondle about that.
Yeah. Exactly.
There was a minor tangent in the middle, which felt like it may have come from some of your own shit about music, about the people bringing the music demos and they're not being played, which I thoroughly enjoyed because it gave a real sense of scope to like how much this guy does not give a fuck about other people. Because he didn't want to throw them out because it would be bad to throw them out. He didn't want to throw them out because he didn't want to get caught doing it.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And what's kind of interesting, and I think it was a really good thing you did, is that a, a person who would murder for this reason generally has difficulties relating to others. If they don't have difficulties relating to others, they very often have that sort of Bundy charm that allows them to to do better than being essentially a cafe barista, and yet that's what he is. So it was a really nice. It's like it can't be, can it? No, oh my God, it is. It was a nice set of mixed signals you gave us, but they were deftly woven.
That's very, very kind of you.
No,
And-
just saying the truth.
Seconded. I had a lot of fun listening to that. So thank you, man.
Well, I think is it time to open the gates for a true pro?
Let's do it. Chuck, I believe you'll be reading an excerpt. Is that right?
Yes. Although I thought you were going to go with the true pro first.
Oh, don't you be doing that to yourself. It's our job to make the funnies.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I was in England, 96 to 97. I was on a Fulbright there, and became very good friends, dear friends with a person who was a professor at the Liverpool, the science fiction program there. They have an
awesome.
MA in it, and David Seed. And it was our last lunch, and he looked at me, and he said, "But so going back to America?" And I said, "Yes." "Aren't you going to miss irony?" And so I try to keep that. I try to keep that and taking the piss alive in my day to day life here in the States.
I knew I
So
liked you for a reason.
at any rate, so what I'm going to read from here is for those who want to follow along at home, chapter 24. And it's not the whole chapter, fear not. In the second book in the in my science fiction series, the one that was that's been nominated for Nebula a few times, and it's set in Jakarta. The year is 2019. There has been so I'll let I'll let listeners decide. Is it an invasion of a planet if some of the people invite you? So that's kind of what we're dealing with here.
Okay.
A very,
Ooh.
very uncertain sort of situation that has to do with the I'm not a big fan necessarily of nation states, but man, to be evil takes corporate entities. So this is that's kind of what's unfolding here. And this is like I said, it's in West Central Jakarta, Earth, and our the protagonist, Kane Riordan, sort of titular character of the series, is trying to deal. They're trying to. He's met some sort of spontaneous resistance fighters in Jakarta, and they have some friends trapped, and they need to find a way to get this automated or remote operated vehicle that's hunting them away from them, so that they can get the heck out of where they've been trapped. Kane leaned the fragment of mirror around the dangling remains of the window frame, resolved to get a better look. The Aratkur ROV was a ground pounder. It was far too heavy to go airborne and improperly shaped to have a live operator inside. Its narrowest point was much thinner than an Aratkur was wide. "Is it a robot?" asked Tega. "No, I think it's an ROV with an expert backup system." "Expert system," echoed one of the younger Indonesians, whose long mellifluous name Kane had learned and promptly forgotten 3 times now. "Yeah," answered Kane, watching the slow, cautious advance of the Aratkur unit, its 2 micro-turrets rotating protectively through rear and flank-covering arcs. "Reporters like to call ground drones like this AIs, but there's no intelligence involved, just very sophisticated algorithms. They can operate independently for a short bit of time." "Huh," nodded Tigger. "Yeah, I can believe that." "Why?" Kane asked. "Well, these expert systems don't like to go into stone or concrete buildings. They won't chase anyone inside," which makes sense. Kane smiled at Tega. "You're right. Stone and other dense construction materials block signals. The machine shouldn't stay where it has to rely upon its own expert system." Tega shrugged. "Sounds like a weakness to me." Kane smiled. "Me too. Let's go. I may have a plan." "You sure this is a good idea, man?" Kane wanted to answer, "Hell no," but instead said, "I'm pretty sure it'll work, as long as you're certain these expert systems don't shoot at unarmed humans. Haven't seen them do it yet, and they've had plenty of opportunity since this afternoon." "And you're sure they have a capture mode?" "Yeah, like I told you, we've seen these robo-roaches come into areas where rebels or rioters have been making trouble. They find some older kids, do a spider sprint, and grab them. Then they carry them back to the Roach Motel." "The what?" "The aliens' compound. They took over the presidential palace. So the roaches ask the kids questions, shoot about anyone they know who might be a rebel. Always with an officer from the army standing there, Tego spat. But then they let him go. Scares the shit out of the kids, but they've never been hurt. Well, that's reassuring, sort of. Okay then, are you people ready? Sure they are. Question is, are you ready? Again, hell no. Yeah, here goes. Kane ducked low and scooted out under the level of the cars parked along the street. He peeked out at the Arakur ROV. It was still creeping forward, aware that its prey, Tega's trapped friends, had moved farther down the dead-end street and were now unable to escape. But precisely where was that prey hiding? Well, here's something new to think about. Kane rose slowly from his hiding place. He walked, hands open, closer to the Arakur ROV, but also angled toward the looted and gutted stone bank across the street. The Arakur unit's rear sensors detected him immediately. One of the mini turrets fixed upon him, the other began sweeping the unit's rear, laboring to keep nearby upper stories and rooftops in its defensive footprint. Come on, call your boss and find out what to do, and who I am. The Arakur unit was utterly motionless for 2 seconds, and then, so suddenly that Kane's stomach clenched and plummeted, the multi-legged device whirled about and came at him with startling speed. Kane had been expecting the charge, but still felt terribly slow as he turned and sprinted into the bank, sure that, at any second, he would feel the Arakur equivalent of a taser probe dig into his back and sprawl him, twitching, across the debris-littered sidewalk. But he made it through the doors into the bank and heard, just behind, the clatter of the ROV's legs break stride. Kane didn't stop. The unit's apparent indecision was merely a split-second pause as it awaited the override signal. Only its live operator could authorize it to enter the structure. Kane, now in the hall leading into the bank's interior offices, was glad he hadn't broken his own stride. He heard the ROV resume its skittering approach, the bank's broken picture windows scraping and screeching as the spider-like legs smashed and dashed them aside in its crazed pursuit. Riordan reached the yawning freight elevator shaft at the end of the hall, grabbed the knotted rope that was hanging there, heard the ROV right behind him. He turned, saw the taser dart dispenser on the front of the robotic arthropod snap open. Just as 3 of Tego's young Anesians, waiting 2 stories overhead, dropped a small jury-rigged counterweight. Kane, clutching the counterweighted rope, blinked at the rapidity of his upward acceleration and was both terrified and gratified to see the mechanical spider leap into the open shaft beneath him. Slowly but steadily, it began ascending, its legs spanning from wall to wall. As soon as the 3 young Indonesians grabbed Kane off the ascending rope, he nodded to a 4th, slightly older one. That fellow was waiting with bolt cutters poised upon the elevator's own counterweight cable, and at Kane's nod, he closed the cutters with a snap. The steel ring that cinched the upper part of the elevator's main cable to the lower half squealed and sparked as the bolt cutter sheared through it. Released from the counterweight in the basement, the car of the freight elevator, waiting 2 stories farther up, began rushing down. The mechanical spider paused, sensors rotating upward to investigate the new sound, right as the car crashed into it and powered the flailing unit all the way down to the bottom of the lightless shaft. Their joint plummet ended with a smashing sound akin to a head-on collision of dump trucks.
I have an immediate question.
Yeah.
Can you tell me the name of the book one more time so I can type it into Amazon, please?
Okay, this is called Trial by Fire. It is the 2nd book in the series.
Kane Riordan. What a bro. I loved that. I loved the military lexicon that you used. It really amps up the scene, you know. The idea of this thing having like a rear defensive pattern and yeah, that description was so fluid, and I had a really good time listening to that. I was hyped, but also interested the whole time.
The alien nature of the ROV, because you know you dressed up as, you know, it's quite laborious in its movements, and then it became fast. That turn, it's like, oh yeah, this is not our tech. This is wrong. This is alien tech. That
Something
little
else.
touches like that just it gets me going. You know what to do.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, I hope if you follow up on that title that you'll enjoy it. That book is sort of one of my favorites, simply because if you take a look at it, the people ask, you know, they ask for what's a book like, but tell me in 2 lines. So I say, okay, I'm going to tell you what movies it's like. It's about it's an alien invasion sort of story that's a mix of Tora, and The Longest Day. and as is with both of those films, if you're familiar with them, there are a lot of different threads and storylines. And what that does is it has me jumping back and forward between a number of different characters, some of whom are the Exosapients. And by the way, the Exosapients, just something that I'll set out there as bait trailed in water. It's at the end of this book, and in ways that I won't reveal here, that you discovered that although arguably the good folks, so to speak, are humans, so are the worst of the bad. So it's not like I'm using, first of all, no monsters in rubber suits. I don't do that. And the other thing being, well, the Arakura subterranean, their vision isn't great, but their ability to see heat and sound and essentially use almost a form of sound, and they attract each other not through what they see, but through voice, the sound of a voice. That's what passes as a secondary sex characteristic for them.
So their fundamental is communication.
Their fundamental is audio, and
yeah.
and if you will, perception of light that is lower than the visible range. So they see infrared not as a single signal, but a variety, you might call it, for if you want to put it in colorblind terms, a hugely diffuse and rich set of shades of gray.
Yeah,
that's really cool. It sounds the whole way through it sounded like it was layered, but you explained everything so well that it was at no point complex or difficult to follow, and the flow of it was excellent. And I think in particular, if we've got any people listening, I know of at least one person that listens who is an arachnophobe. I think that might really trigger them. But yeah, definitely follow up on that. People listening.
A lot of service people do like this. Also, through paths we may or may not talk about, I wind up also doing a lot of think tanking and white paper sort of stuff inside the Washington Beltway in the defense and intelligence areas. And thankfully, having done that has allowed me to bring a lot of, I think, the facility perhaps with the language, with the terminology, and mesh that with hopefully, not excessive description. My attitude is I'll do the engineering so you don't have to, and I don't put it in the books. There's very rarely do you get a mechanical explanation of anything. But for those who revel in those things, if they do a little homework, they'll say, this guy did his homework. So there you go.
Works. Did you have to tread a line between sort of going into it in your fiction and the NDAs that you must have signed?
Yes, I have. That's a very, very good question. As a matter of fact, I was invited to participate in a program at the National Reconnaissance Office, and I called a friend of mine. I have friends all over the artistic and political spectrum, and one of them I'd known who had been involved in exactly this, the late Jerry Pournelle, who I called him and I said, Jerry, if I do this, what's going to happen? And he said, are you planning on making a living as a defense consultant or as a writer? And I said, a writer. And he said, then don't do it. Say no. Say thanks, but say no.
Say no. Oh, wow.
Well, because the bottom line is for instance, I have a friend who's also got NDA issues, but as long as he writes fantasy, he's fine. He's totally cool. But the moment it gets into technology, they have got to be. It's not even if you thought of it first. I mean, I was at the NRO to begin with because of something that I run out in the first book, and they said, "Wow, this is exactly what augmented autonomy and virtual reality married should look like." And actually, that was my first reading from my first solo novel. Was not to a bunch of people at a convention or at a podcast. It was in front of a room of people at the National Reconnaissance Office. So I've tread a very strange path. I've tread a very strange path over time. But yes, it has. So the short answer, and I should have stuck with it, is yes, it has been a concern.
I mean, thanks for confirming that aliens exist and that you've written the government's defense for them. But
I
don't know if I needed that today. I have a horrible fear of grey aliens.
Don't worry, they're brown. Gray is so last millennia. It really is. Unless you do it with Brogans, then you can get away with it. But otherwise, no. Yeah. Sorry. Carry on.
Oh wow. Well, I'm not entirely sure I can follow NDA defense work inspired
Don't
fiction.
worry, man. We're going to be cancelled by the American government before we get to your story. So it's.
Well, man, if they were going to do it for this, I wouldn't even be alive to do this one right now. So don't worry about that. No, I don't. I do not have clearance. I didn't want that. That's actually part of the thing. So don't worry.
Sure.
Everything here is totally cool. I know you're laughing, but just in case, the number of people who will listen to a podcast like this and say, Ben and Nico, they know something. Damn it!
Oh well.
I better erase this off my drive.
Well, I mean, you did tell us off mic about the.
Statement redacted.
No, stop! What are you doing?
Nico, you had to say it. Damn it! I knew you'd be an agent provocateur. Okay.
Oh, I think he just killed me.
More dead air. Pay no
Yep.
attention. Move on by. These aren't
Noises.
the podcasters you're looking for. Yeah.
Oh, I'm having too much fun causing trouble. Right.
Far too much.
Let's re-rail. Ben, do you have a story for us?
You know what, Nico? I might. Oh, right. Yes, no, I do have a story for you, and it's alarmingly different in tone. So we will see how we go. Problem solved. My family's problems began with my grandfather's arrogance. In a land where even stepping off the woodland path results in a story dragging you along by your hair, he decided to make himself into a king. That desire to raise himself above other folk was, I hope, driven by a desire for progress. I cling to the possibility that he wished to see a brighter future for the folk before the weird took him. Without that benevolent intention, all that remains for me are the cruel consequences of his hubris and the stories of him told by the land. You see, the folk have no real written history, and everything else we have lived is told in stories of the weird. Things as they are appear to be as they ever were. The folk spread out in villages through the land, each is self-sufficient and loosely governed by wise elders. Beyond these small havens of simplistic life, the land itself weaves tales. Trickster goblins, witches with silver bells, giants living in tree houses. Those beings of the weird world await any of the folk who wander into a story. Often, the land is subtler. A romance might bloom from a glance caught in the still surface of well water, or a desire for adventure might suffuse a youngster of the folk. The result is always the same. A story is told and retold countless times. The folk and the land live in an entwined harmony of beginning, middle, and end. You can't smell, see, or hear the story when you're in one, but you can learn to feel it. The touch of the weird world plucks at your emotions to form you into the hero or the villain. It heightens sensation and dilates time. I've learnt to notice stories, as they've been trying to kill me my entire life. The land does not like change, it does not promote progress, and it actively prevents power. When my grandfather unified all of the folk that lived from the western bank of the River Egale to the northern ice shore, he created a problem for the land. When he built his mighty fortress of Idillion, the weird world began to act on him to solve that problem. He became the villain for the stories of the folk, a man with depth and great purpose, reduced to a simplified antagonist. I've heard the stories of noble outlaws assaulting his tax collectors, of his bloody wars to expand his evil domain, of his seizure of young brides only for their love to end in despair. These darker stories were the beginning of the punishment from the land. His children, the princes and princesses, sprouted forth in their own dark stories. The folk now tell each other tales of those scions, and all of them feature destruction as a result of dominion. All of his children were dead, or consigned to fates worse than it, before my grandfather was eventually slain by a hero chosen by the land for the purpose. Through that hero, the weird world took its revenge on the man who had dared to change the world. I am his only surviving heir. From the moment I was born, stories have plucked at me. Will I be the villain that tortured cats as a child, or the boy that became possessed by an evil spirit? Initially by luck, and later through determination, I have avoided them all, but I had help. My grandfather's library was his unsung achievement. All of the mighty defences and towering battlements of Idillion, they were all there to protect it. During his reign, he gathered wise folk and transformed them into scholars. He had them take censuses, write down historical information that could be passed from stories, and establish the past so that the present could focus on the future. The folk do not remember to tell that part when they recount the tales of his evil deeds. I studied every scroll in the place, and from it I learnt how to reinforce the boundary line where reality meets the weird. As a young man, I progressed from innocent evil in the tales the land tried to tell of me to a dangerous facsimile of my grandfather ensconced in the fortress of Adilion. The land is not inventive, and armed with his library, I was able to predict the stories when the weird world reached out to manipulate me. The land failed to make me into the evil overlord it wished to portray me as, and as my confidence grew, I began to despise the weird of the land, for I had seen it for the oppressive and suffocating force that it truly was. The inertia of the weird leads to a plateau of progress for the folk. It was in that realization that I began to feel I must continue my grandfather's work. And rather than sitting in Adilion, defending myself, I would need to strike back. Within my kingdom, I will strip out the society that has grown around stories. There is no other way to pull the teeth of the land other than to take what it desires, and I will do what must be done. I will outlaw storytelling for the folk. The punishment for breaking this law must be dire, or I will fail. My scholars will study my grandfather's library and act incisively to abort stories when the land tries to tell them. My warriors will seek out these goblins, witches, and giants that lurk in the woods and end them before they can ensnare one of the folk in their tales. I will promote literacy and through it establish learning amongst the folk. My engineers and tradesmen will build towns to draw in the growing population from the villages, and in those bustling towns, innovations will follow hard on the heels of invention. Throughout my kingdom, my land, not a word of a story will be told without my law stifling it. Through my actions, the folk will be free, and I will not be a villain.
And just like that, stories were dead. Thanks for coming to the podcast, everyone. This is the last episode.
Well, I like that a lot.
Oh,
I really did.
lovely. I was just going to say, I'm privy to a little bit of information. I know many years ago now, you had a project called The Folk. Is this linked in any way?
It is, yeah. So I wrote a tabletop role-playing system and setting called The Folk in 2014, I think it was, that was all centered around the idea of telling stories with friends. So you can see that I've not actually strayed too far from that, although it was quite a few years ago now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was an older project, and it was something that I was sort of interested in exploring a bit with a bit of fiction, considering it's about stories anyway. And I was sort of taken by the idea of the evil, seeing from the other side of the evil overlord. So,
yeah. I really like the way that his grandfather was made into a villain through the actions of the Fae, for lack of a better term, the weird, as you were calling them.
Yeah, it's a bit of an odd one to read out that, because it's obviously weird spelt W-Y-R-D.
Yeah. But yeah, the fact that they'd made him evil because they needed him to be evil, and it was only through those actions that his grandson is actually probably pretty evil. But they can't make him a villain because he knows how they work. It's just really nicely constructed.
So it's interesting that you perceive him as not a villain there, because I would argue that the young king is he's fallen foul by the end of the story, I think.
Oh no, I mean he's definitely the character whose perspective we were seeing from, the grandson. He definitely is evil fully, like he's fully bad, but the weird can't do anything about it. That's what I liked. Whereas it sounded like his granddad, wasn't that bad a sort, but the weird did him over anyway.
There were a bunch of things that I thought were very, in addition to the general. By the way, there's something that probably will get lost if I don't say it right away, which was the performative aspect. You started with a voice that was sort of like, and now I shall tell my tale of woe. So you're expecting this sort of highly vulnerable individual, but in fact, what you get is somebody with to to quote Loki from the recent movies, a glorious purpose married in this case to a terrible resolve, and that the resolve is, if indeed, as Nico was saying, the weird needs villains. It probably needs a cycle. It needs a sine wave of villains and heroes and villains and heroes and villains. You get the picture. And it made another one. And it made one. And what's fascinating is he's telling a story, of course, and saying that the last thing stories. And in there, you also bound in another lovely note. And this is the sort of stuff I think we writers do. Sometimes we know it, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we only realize later on we meant it, but hadn't fully, hadn't fully arrived at the full realization of what we were doing. But you said at some point you spoke about beginning, middle, and end. That was a line, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
It was, yeah.
And the thing is that everything but this story resonates not with linearity but cyclicity. That the everything happens in these, that the relationship between the folk and the weird and the land is not one of beginning, middle, and end. It's on a wheel. And there was the moment I heard that, I thought to myself, this guy doesn't really get it, does he? Which was sort of like, for me, that was the key foreshadow
I think
where this was going.
I think you're spot on. Like the idea, he sees stories as things that are just on their own, as you say. Like that village over there is telling the story of Jack and the Beanstalk or whatever. That one over there is telling a babushka story or something, and he sort of breaks them down into their little components because he's only ever be able to see it through the lens of the library, rather than like feel the world in a way, even though he says that he has. So yeah, and you're completely right that the land, the whole point is that the land cyclistically tells stories.
Yep.
So that's
he sees the world in this incredibly particularized and atomized. It's all it's fascinating because then he talks about engineers. So you're thinking about how gears, the wheels, and the cogs, and they all fit together, and it's like the weird is trying to tell him, no man, that ain't how it works.
Absolutely not. There's
it was really good. It's really good.
Thank you. That's really appreciated. There's a line in I forget which Discworld book it is, but from Terry Pratchett's Discworld, one of his witches on the nature of evil mentions that you don't actually have pure proper evil until you start treating people as things.
Yeah.
Well put.
And everything else is sort of shades of grey and stuff, but people as things, that's what evil is. And that's exactly what he's become. He's moving pieces on a board. And yeah, I possibly my performance at the end didn't quite get it, but it's this idea of.
Oh, I think the way you asked that you end with him asking a question, rather than a statement, is very effective. It suggests that we're watching the final stages of this transformation. Yeah. And so, as the reader, we want to jump in and say, "Don't do it." You will become exactly what you fear. This is your last chance.
Exactly. Perfect. Yeah, oh man, I'm so happy that came across.
That kind of teetering on the edge of the void of he now has the option of, does he say, "Oh no, I've become a naughty boy," and stop, or is he just gonna fucking lean into this? And I'm kind of glad I don't know, but this is a Ben Holroyd-Del story, so he's probably gonna lean into it and be a horrible git.
Almost certainly. Most people.
Well, I think it's also a great hook for the answering of that very question. Yes, because we don't know which way he might go. That question mark suggests that there's an opportunity here. He's one of the really interesting villain types. The ones who is this Darth Vader 10 years earlier or something like that, or a lifetime earlier, when you stand at on the brink or at a crossroads, as the case may be, and you're saying, which way do I go? And you get the feeling like if somebody walked through the door and said what Nico said, which is like, don't be a git, maybe if he didn't kill him first, that actually the story rolls one way. And I love it. I think it's a great setup. And I will confess that it feels like synchronicity, because that other thing that I said maybe I would have out there to read deals with what a dragon thinks of human books.
Oh wow! Oh, we're gonna have to get that from you then at some point.
Yeah, I want it.
You can
I
have
mean,
whatever you want. So we could go to questions, or we could do that, or we can do whatever you like.
well, I'll tell you what, we will.
Oh.
I think I'd really like to hear it as a response to this, if you're okay to read it as such.
Yeah, bonus
Ready
story
to
time.
go. And not only is this, it's I think about the same length as the other. It is from the just submitted work, my first epic fantasy, and the Vortex of Worlds series, and the novel is titled This Broken World. And I'll, rather than spend a lot of time talking about it, I'll just say I deal a lot with characters who start more or less on the inside, but a search, if they're not willing to compromise truth, if they're not willing to accept easy answers, ultimately they encounter outward pushing forces. And that's what's happening to the protagonist here, who is only speaks once or twice, because this is the dragon scene. After the dragon has, in surprising ways, accepted their presence in its lair, which, by the way, they don't come here exactly for treasure. That's why some of them here, but he doesn't. He comes because he wants to ask questions. And the dragon, just to give you an idea, just to set a little bit of a theme, the dragon says, "Oh, you're one of those. You've come here for treasure." They say, "Yeah, well, why not? I mean, you have." It's like, do you know how this got here? This got here because of all the ones who, like you, thought I had treasure. This is rubbish. This is what's left of them when I'm done with them. And the more of them who come, the more treasure they think is here. You are doing this to yourselves. Do you not get that? So that gives you an idea of some of the way that the fantasy tropes are very much turned on their head in this one.
Excellent.
So this is from This Broken World, and this is the dragon giving his take on books. And it reads right to the end of the chapter, but it's short. The dragon folded its paws. My, but you set great store by these books, don't you? Druidane tried not to resent the facetious tone. They've been useful enough so far. Have they? Shall I tell you what I have observed about all your species' books over these many centuries? Druidane crossed his arms. Please do. He wondered if the dragon's raised chin and finger were an unintentional reprise of academic posturing, or actually meant to lampoon them. If there's any one thing that can be said for most books, the dragon began with a pedantic flourish, it is this. The more their authors claim complete authority in a subject, the less they actually have. And since so many of your own investigations arose from old tomes filled with old observations scribbled by old men, let us begin by considering books which purport to deal with legend. Oh, I beg your pardon, your term, history. Firstly, the more distant the epoch, the less a modern observer may hope to accurately and adequately represent not merely the events, but the mentality of those days. And this is because their understanding of both are ineluctably shaped by whatever accounts they themselves have found in archives, accounts written by people who simply happen to be lived during those times. Scholars assume that these accounts are extremely reliable and accurate, but just how accurate is that assumption? After all, who is most likely to take the time and trouble to record contemporary events? Why, those who have something to gain by doing so. Only a very few will be motivated by the desire to preserve knowledge, since there isn't much money or fame in it. But gods, Ahern muttered, leaning toward Druidane, talks just the way you do. See them. The dragon continued without pause. Likely to gain from such scribbling? Why, someone who can accrue power or money by crafting an account that convincingly presents one side in a dispute or conflict as being superior or intimately preferable to the other. Druidane sighed. So you maintain that the accuracy and objectivity of authors is always made suspect by their personal motivations? How could it be anything but? I have seen this phenomenon play out countless times. Let us say a historically faithful account is written. It may be rescribed once, maybe twice, but ultimately the copies go up in flames during the next of your species' frequent upheavals. It is a rarity for any to remain after but a few slim centuries. Meanwhile, innumerable partisan diatribes from the same epoch endure because their reproduction was as prodigious and rapid as that of flies breeding in dung. An apt metaphor, actually. Druidane smiled. For one who finds little of use in books, you seem to have made quite an extensive study of them. The dragon's slow, answering smile grew very broad. Ah, it said in a sly tone, you have caught me. Druidain nodded and discovered that it was impossible to see all those teeth and not think of being eaten. Catching me out demonstrates what may be the best value of books, that if read properly, they do not fill the reader with fixed ideas, but rather create a habit of interrogating them. And how can true change occur without that skill? A delighted grin had been slowly spreading across Ahern's broad face. Well, he said loudly, when the great worm had finished, I didn't expect to hear good ordinary sense from such an extraordinary creature, but this has been a journey of many surprises. I'm with you, Worm. Whatever value is to be found in books is vastly overrated. Action. Action is what is wanted. That is not what I said, the dragon sighed, closing its eyes. How not? You told my mate here to act more and read less. No, I am merely intimating that if he means to change what your species knows, or what it does, then it would be unwise to rely too uncritically on books, or to assume that greater antiquity implies greater accuracy or honesty. And how is that any different from saying a bloke mustn't let books or endless cogitation get in the way of what makes change happen? Action. The dragon's voice took on an edge of irritation. Oh, you mean well-reasoned action such as yours, murdering thinking beings in their warrens for the bounty on their heads or thumbs, seeking great beasts to slay for their presumed treasure, roaming around the world with no greater goal or purpose than collecting the rubbish you see around me here? Ahern was no longer smiling and had become quite red. Well, then, what's your idea of action? I don't know. Maybe going to an uncrossable river and building a bridge. Going to an orphanage and being kind to a child. Or better still, going to a high mountain and learning to fly. Learning to fly? I don't have wings, dragon, or haven't you noticed? I noticed, but I was hoping you wouldn't. At least not until you had taken that first elucidating step. Ahern crossed his arms and half smiled, half snarled. Into the revelations of the great beyond, eh? The dragon glanced at him. Despite your innumerable flaws, you do have a gift for banter. For that, I will overlook much. Now, all this chatter has tired me. I have fed adequately and exerted myself. I shall sleep. So should you. Why? Because you are leaving tomorrow. Seeing their surprised looks, the dragon explained. I am ensuring that you observe proper etiquette by not overstaying your welcome. You may thank me when I wake.
I really like that dragon. He's when you described him early on as a pedantic dragon and really followed through on that promise.
Well, I did that, yes. It may be too much for some.
Well, I don't know. Like, I think, we're aware of different depictions of the personality of dragons in fantasy literature, and I haven't really come across one that's like that before. So I think you've found a real unique angle to for dragons to talk from that still works, because the pedantic dragon is in this just as precious about his philosophy and outlook on life and human history
Yep.
and books as other dragons are on their hoard.
Well, yeah, it's a hoard of
Yep.
knowledge.
Hoard of knowledge,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep, that's exactly. I had to, it was just I always ask one of the things about writing, whether they're aliens or dragons or whatever the case may be, what does the world look like to them, and not to use them. I think authors are. I know it's a writing podcast, so I'll say this in the way of maybe. I refuse to think of anything that comes out of my mouth, hurl of wisdom, but maybe a, a, a small a small dented garnet of wisdom, perhaps. Um, in that, if you're probably not getting the best you could out of a creature with a different perspective if you are thinking about writing them for how they're going to help your story rather than out of the honesty of their own self-perceptions
Okay,
and
I
their
think
perception
that's
of the
very
world,
interesting. Yeah,
because that's what all intelligence is going to have, right? All intelligence is going to see outside of its own eyes, and
Yeah.
that's where the great richness of it is.
I really like that. I like the concept behind it and why you created that character. That feels very special. So, do you want to just give us the name of the book again?
Yes, it is This Broken World. It is the first of at least a trilogy, but mine have a tendency to burgeon. Called the Vortex of Worlds trilogy. It is already on Amazon. It is out through Baen Books in November.
Perfect.
Oh, exciting!
Well,
I am. I've
yeah.
got to say, I'm still stuck on one. I can hear it in the voice of Benedict Cumberbatch's version of Smaug, but it's a dragon telling someone they've got a gift for banter. As lovely as that passage was, that means something so specific here in England.
Well, I think accusing someone of saying that they act more, read less probably is quite bantery, isn't it?
You've got mad bents, barrel rider. A cheeky Nando's.
Cheeky Nando's. All right,
Oh, yeah.
Grandpa.
I remembered the memes from my youth.
Oh dear. Oh well.
I'm falling behind the pace now. We're getting a little. What little I have of the regionalisms have ceased to provide me with insight.
Fortunately for you, it's a shallow pool to drown in. So
Don't worry, gang, it's gone weird.
But that's part of the charm, right? That's part of the charm.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates.
Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?